We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Amud Aleph and Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 40a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought a brisa. How do you know if tzir, if brine is kosher, if it has fish floating in it, specifically if it has the kilbis fish floating in it, then you know it's kosher. And the way the brisa phrased it was, if it has one kilbis or two kilbios, shotatos bo, if they're floating in it, so then you know it's kosher. And so the Gemara asks, hashta kilbis achas, now if just one kilbis is floating, amrit shari, you said that is permitted. Shtei kilbios mi boy, so if there are two kilbios, do we even need to say it? It's obvious, of course it's going to be considered kosher in such a situation. And the Gemara says, lo kash, it's not difficult. Kan bipsuchos, in one case we're talking where the barrels are open, and kan bistumos, in the other case we're talking where the barrels are closed. Rashi explains, chevios psuchos, if it's open barrels, lo sagi bechod, it's not enough just to have one kilbis floating in there. Dikol amemer me'al manafel, because you could say that it just fell in there from somewhere else, therefore it's not an indication that it's kosher. Again, if it came from it internally, so to speak, then we know that it is a kosher brine, because that's where the kilbis is found. And the Gemara continues, the brisa on the previous summit said that the taurus she'ena trufa, which is a kind of a fish called a taurus that is not minced, so that is permitted. And the brisa said what's considered not minced, as long as the rosh and the shedra, as long as the head and the spine of the fish are recognizable. And on that we have the following machlokas amuroim. Itmar, it was stated, Rav Huna Amar, Rav Huna says, ad shetei rosh v'shedra nikar, it has to be both the head and the spine have to be recognizable. Rav Nachman Amar, Rav Nachman says no, it doesn't mean both, it means o rosh, o shedra. It means either the head or the spine have to be recognizable. As long as one of them is recognizable, then it is permitted. And the Gemara continues, Mesev Rav Ukva bar Chama. Rav Ukva bar Chama asks the following question. The Mishnah in Meseches Chulin says, Uvidogim, that when it comes to fish, what are the signs of a kosher fish? Kol sheyesh lo snapir v'kaskeses, as long as it has fins and scales, then it is a kosher fish. Rashi explains, Uvidogim kol sheyesh ben snapir v'kaskeses, Mishnah hi be'elu treifus. Again, this is a Mishnah in Elu treifus in Meseches Chulin. The point of the question here is, Alma ein simen l'dogim b'davar acher. We see that what is the sign of a kosher fish? It's fins and scales. There's no other kinds of signs. The kasha l'tarvayu, this is a question on both of them. How can you say that the rosh and the shedra, those are the signs for a kosher fish? But again, the signs for a kosher fish are the snapir and the kaskeses. And the Gemara says, Amar Abaya, Abaya says, Kitanya ahi be'aro ufalmuda. There we're talking about specific kinds of fish, the aro and the falmuda. The damu reishayu l'tmeim. There it happens to be that their heads are similar to non-kosher fish. In other words, there are some fish which actually are kosher fish, but their heads do resemble the non-kosher fish. And so for those you use the snapir and the kaskeses as your signs of the kosher fish. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda Mishmei de Ula. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Ula, machlokas, this entire machlokas again between Rav Huna and Rav Nachman in terms of whether you need both the rosh and the shedra, that's Rav Huna's opinion, or either the rosh or the shedra, that's Rav Nachman's opinion. That machlokas is letavel betzira, and that machlokas is if you're dipping in their brine, but you're not eating directly. Aval beguvan, but for the body of the fish itself, in order to eat the actual fish, so divrei hakol aser, everybody agrees you have to be more strict over there. Everybody agrees it is going to be prohibited ad sheyeh rosh v'shedra nikar, unless you have both the head and the spine that they are recognizable. Rashi says, Aval begufan lechol gufan shel dogim shel taurus. If you're going to eat the actual taurus fish, so again everybody agrees you need to have both signs. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Zeira says, May reish have a matvilna betziron. Originally I would dip in their brine. Kevon de shamana lahad Amar Rav Yehuda mishmei de Ula. But then when I heard what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Ula, that machlokas latavel betziron, that even when it comes to dipping in the brine, there's a machlokas, and there is a strict opinion of Rav Huna. Aval begufan divrei hakol aser, but when it comes to the fish itself, everybody agrees it's forbidden. Ad shehei rosh v'shedra nikor, until you have the head and the spine recognizable. So then I was more strict, betziron I wouldn't dip even in the brine because I want to be strict like Rav Huna. Rashi explains, May reish have a matvilna b'tzir. Originally, I would dip in the brine, b'chad siman, and I would rely on one siman, o b'rosh, o b'shedra, either the head or the spine. The havasal gadaitach, because I thought, t'chi pligi Rav Huna v'Rav Nachman begufan pligi, that Rav Huna and Rav Nachman only argued about the fish itself. Aval b'tzir and afilu Rav Huna mod, but by the brine, even Rav Huna would admit that you can be lenient, but then I heard that it's not true, that over there also Rav Huna is strict, so therefore b'tzir nami lo tavilna desvir lik Rav Huna, I hold like Rav Huna, so therefore I'm machmir even by the brine. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rapapa says, Hilchas of the halacha is actually a rosh v'shedra nikr shal kol achas v'yachas. When you're talking about these kind of fish, it has to be that the head and the spine are recognizable on every single individual fish. You can't say that just because one of the fish in the batch is kosher, then all the other ones are as well. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question on that from the following Brisa. The Brisa says, Chatichos sheyesh bohen siman, you have cuts of fish that they have a siman. Again, we're talking here of one of the signs that it is kosher. Bein bekulan, bein b'miksasan, whether the sign is on all of them or some of them. V'afilu be'echon mimeya sheben, even if it's 1 out of 100 of them that have the sign. Kulan mutaro, so then they're all permitted. U'maisa bovet kochavim echad shehevi gorav shel chatichos, there was an incident with an idolater who brought a jug of cuts of fish. V'nimtza siman be'achas mehen, and there was a siman of kashrus found on one of them. V'hitter Rav Shimon ben Gamliel as hagorav kulan. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said the entire jug is now permitted. And therefore that is a question against Rav Papa. Rav Papa says every single fish individually has to have the sign of kashrus. And the Gemara says, Tirgam Rav Papa answers, he'll understand that brisa, kishechatichos shavas, that brisa was only talking about a situation where those different cuts of the fish, if you put them together, you could put them together like a puzzle, and essentially it would come to one fish. It was clear that they're all coming from the exact same fish based on the shape. But the Gemara says, Yihachi, if so, ma'ila, so what do you even need to say it for? Of course, in such a situation, they're all coming from the same fish. The Gemara says to that, Ma'u detema, what might you have said, Nechosh deal mystery? Maybe we should be concerned that sometimes it happens that you can have different fish, but you put them together, and they're all going to look like they come from the same fish. Kamash Malon, that's what it's coming to teach, that we're not going to say that in this situation it does seem to be that it's all from the same fish, and therefore we can be lenient. Rashi explains, Keshachatichos shavos keshemechaber nosan, when you attach the pieces together, yachad together, mischabros v'nikaros v'niros shayukulam midag echad, they attach to each other, and it's clear that they all come from the same fish. And the Gemara continues, Hahu arba de tzachanta, there was a ship of tzachanta fish, and presumably the tzachanta is referring to the chiluk that was identified earlier. Tiyasi l'sichra, it came to Sichra. Nafak Rav Huna bar Chinana v'chaza be'kalfi, Rav Huna bar Chinana went, and he saw that in the ship there were scales, v'shari, and he permitted it, he assumed that all of the fish in this ship were kosher. Amar le Rava said to him, Umi iko de shari ki agavna, can you really say that these fish are permitted in such a situation? Ba'asra de shchichi kalfi, in a place where it's common to have fish with scales. In other words, it could be these scales came from other fish, and that's why they're lying in the ship. There's no evidence whatsoever that all of these fish should be kosher. And so nafak shipure de Rava v'asar, so the heads of Rava's yeshiva, they went out and they said that it was forbidden. Shipure literally means shofar, like the blowing of a shofar. They made an announcement that it was asr. But shipure de Rav Huna bar Chinana v'shari, but then went out the leaders from Rav Huna bar Chinana, and they said that it was permitted. Amar Rav Yirmiyah midifti, Rav Yirmiyah from Difti said, Lididi Amar li Rav Papi, to me, Rav Papi said, Ki shara Rav Huna bar Chinana, when Rav Huna bar Chinana said that in this case it's permitted, that was only b'tzirin, that was only with the brine, as we said just above. With the brine, one can be a little more lenient. Aval begufan lo, but with the actual fish, he would not be so lenient. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Ashi said, Lididi Amar li Rav Papa, to me Rav Papa said, Ki shara Rav Huna bar Chinana, when Rav Huna bar Chinana said it was permitted, afilu begufan, he actually said it was permitted, even the fish itself. And Rav Ashi continues, Va'ano, and I myself, lo meser asrina, I don't forbid it to Amar li Rav Papa, because that's what Rav Papa said to me. Again, that Rav Huna bar Chinana said it's permitted. V'lo mishra sharina, but I don't permit it either to Amar Rav Yehuda mishmei de'ula, because Rav Yehuda in the name of Ula said machlokes l'tavel b'tziran, that the machlokes again is to dip in the brine. Aval begufan divrei hakol, but when it comes to the fish itself, everybody holds ad she'ei rosh v'shedra nikr shel kol echad v'echad. You have to have the head and the spine recognizable for each individual fish, and therefore, according to that, we would not permit the entire batch. You have to have a siman for every single one. And Rashi explains, Umika deshari ki agavna bi'asra deshchichi kalfi, can we really say that we're permitting all of the fish in this ship in a place where there are plenty of fish with scales? The yeshlom arshem dogim ta'orim mutmein, because you could say maybe there was a mix of kosher and non-kosher fish. Yesh, that's what was on the ship. The kaskasim and ta'orim bo, and the scales came from the ones that were kosher. And Rashi continues that Rav Ashi said, Va'anolo meisar asrina, I don't forbid lechol gufan, to eat the actual fish, mishum klife de mishtachi bi'ar, but because of the scales that are found in the ship. Rav Ashi Kamarlo, again, this is Rav Ashi speaking, and the reason why I don't prohibit it is the Kamarli Rav Papa de Sharinu Rav Huna, because Rav Papa said to me that Rav Huna said it was permitted, but again, I don't permit it either, because there's reports as well that you have to have the signs on each individual fish. And the Gemara continues, Yosef Rav Chinana Baridi, Kame de Ravada Barava. Rav Chinana Baridi was sitting in front of Ravada Barava, Yosef V'Kamar, and he was sitting and saying as follows, Over Kochavim Shehevi Areva Malaya Chevios. If an Over Kochavim, an idolater, he brings a small ship full of barrels, V'nimtzis Kilbis Bi'achas Mehen, and there's a kilbis in one of them. Again, the kilbis floating in there is a sign that it's kosher. So psucho, so if they're open, kulan mutaris, then they're all permitted. Stumos, but if they're closed, he mutaris, so the one that has the kilbis is mutar, the kulan asuros, and all of the rest of them are going to be forbidden. Amarle said to Minolacha, where do you know this from? And he answered me, Tlasa Kroi Shemi Ali, I heard it from 3 psukim. It means from 3 people who are as reliable as if it was in a pasuk. And who are the 3 individuals? May Rav, Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, from Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. And Rashi explains, Arev is a sfina katan and Arev is a small ship. Kulan mutaros, they're all permitted. If they're open barrels, you assume just like there was one of them in this particular barrel, there was a kilbis, they were really in all of them. But since they were open, so the kilbis, they ended up leaving those barrels because they were open barrels. And so therefore, again, you can say they're all permitted. How do we know this halacha? Mitlasa kroi from 3 psukim, meaning mi gimel chachamim gedolim, from 3 great chachamim. Shem kedai lismach aleim kala mikra. Person is able to rely on them like he relies on a pasuk. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Bruna Amar Rav. Rav Bruna says that Rav says, and some have the girsa of Rav Kahana says that Rav says, Kirvei dogim v'uvron, the innards of fish and their eggs, ein nikachen ela min hamumcha. They can only be bought from an expert. Again, an expert is not going to ruin his reputation. So if he's selling you what are kosher, you can assume that it's kosher. But otherwise, you can't buy it. Rami le Ula Rabbi Dustoi Demin Biri. Ula asked the following question to Rabbi Dustoi from Biri. Midikama Rav Kirvei Dogim V'Uvran Ein Nikachen Elamin Amumcha. From the fact that Rav says over here that the innards of fish and their eggs can only be bought from an expert. Michlal de dog tame islay uber. So that implies that a non-kosher fish could have an egg, because you're saying that you have to have an expert. Otherwise, these eggs might be coming from non-kosher fish. It implies that non-kosher fish lay eggs. Or a mini, but we have a contradiction on that from the following brisa. Dog tame mashritz. A dog tame is mashritz, a non-kosher fish. It means it gives birth to live fish. It's not laying eggs. And dog tahor metel beitzim, but it's the kosher fish that they lay eggs. And so therefore, it seems from over here that anytime you have the eggs of a fish, it should be obvious that they are kosher. And so the Gemara says, Sami mikan uver. And the Gemara says that Rav Dustoi, he responds, you should remove eggs. It's true, you don't need an expert. It's obvious that they are kosher. However, the Gemara continues, Amarle Rabbi Zeir. Rabbi Zeir said to him, Lo sismi, you should not remove eggs, because tarvayu matile beitzim ninu, because actually both kosher and non-kosher fish can lay eggs. Ela zem mashertz mi bachutz, v'zem mashertz mi bifnim. But rather what's going on over here is that the kosher eggs, they lay the eggs, and then the eggs hatch outside in the water. And when it comes to the non-kosher fish, so they have the eggs inside of their body, and by the time the baby fish comes out, so it's coming out, the egg has already hatched. But there is such a thing as eggs by the non-kosher fish as well, and so therefore again you do need a purchase from an expert when it comes to the eggs as well. And the Gemara says Lama li mumcha, but still, why do we need an expert? Livdok b'simonim, why not just check there are simonim on the eggs of fish as well? The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, kisimoni beitzim kach simoni dogim, the same signs by the eggs are the same signs on the fish. And the Gemara interrupts and asks, Simoni dogim sakadayatach, do you think that the eggs have the same signs as the fish? That doesn't make any sense. Simoni dogim snapir v'kaskeses ksibahu, by the signs of fish, it says that it has fins and scales. Obviously, the eggs are not fins and scales. And so the Gemara continues and explains, Ela kesimone beitzim kach simone uvrei dogim. Rather, what the Brisa means to say is the signs of eggs, meaning bird eggs, is the same signs that we find by the eggs of fish. You can rely on the same signs to determine whether it's a kosher egg. V'elohein simone beitzim, and the following are the signs of eggs. Kol shekoderes v'agolgeles, if it's wide at one side and gets a little more narrow. Rosha echod chad v'rosha echod chod. Again, one side is round, one side is more narrow, is more sharp. Tahora, then you know it's a kosher egg. Beis rasha chodin, but if both sides are sharp, or ubeis rasha kadin, if both sides are wider, then tameya, then you know that it's not kosher. Chelmon mi bachutz v'chelbon mi b'fnim tameya. If the yolk is on the outside and the white is on the inside, then you know it's not kosher. Chelbon mi bachutz, but if the white part is on the outside, v'chelmon mi b'fnim, and the yolk is on the inside, tahor, then you know it's kosher. Chelbon v'chelmon mu'ravin zeh bazeh, if the white part and the yolk are mixed up with one another, zuhi beitzas hasheretz, then you know that that is the egg of a sheretz. That's one of the 8 shrotzim that conveys tumah. And Rashi explains, Simone beitzim shel oftar, this is the simonim of eggs of kosher birds. Shekoderes means meshucha, shechava berosha echad means it's wide on one side. V'holeches u'mekatzeres v'mesheches, and then it gets more narrow. V'agulgeles agula mitzideo, megalgeles de'ein sideh rechav, and that means it's not so wide. Rosha echad chad rachav, again one side is wide. Kolomar asui kekad, sherachav mitachta beis moshav, again one side is wide, and then it gets more narrow. And we'll take a look at the earlier Rashi as well. Zem mashertz mi bachutz. Again, the kosher fish is the one that's mashertz mi bachutz. It lays the eggs outside and then they hatch. Dagtar le'achar shehut lebeitzaso misharetzes ve'omedes me'le bechol. It lays the egg in the sand and then the fish comes out. Avol dagtame. But when it comes to the non-kosher fish, mashertz mi b'fnim b'mei ho'em. That's in the womb of its mother. Le'achar shenigmar beitza b'meiav. So the egg is completed in the womb and the fish comes out live. And in any case, the Gemara here is in the middle of a question. If there are signs of eggs of fish, so why not just look at the signs? Why do you need to purchase from an expert? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rava. Rava says, Kishani mochu. We're talking about in a situation where everything is melted, so to speak, meaning to say you can't discern any of the signs. It's already crushed. That's when you need to rely on an expert. And the Gemara continues, Ul Reb Dustoi. Now, according to Reb Dustoi d'min Biri, according to Reb Dustoi from Biri, Diamar Sami Mikan Ubran, he says that you remove from here eggs, because again, he holds that when it comes to the eggs of fish, they're always kosher, because the non-kosher fish don't have any eggs. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Amid Beis.